So Scott is a composer and a truly multimedia artist. I guess you can technically be multimedia if you can do two things, but he does a lot more than that. He has a deep interest in language and literature and fuses music with text, video, digital soundscape, photography, and experimental theater to explore an array of contemporary and often urgent themes, including ecology and landscape, architecture, protest and revolution, and urban life. He's currently assistant professor of composition and music theory at Rutgers University, and he has received numerous national and international awards, fellowships, and grants. His celebrated compositions have been commissioned or performed by the Hong Kong, Buffalo, and Colorado Springs Philharmonics, the Tucson Symphony, Hong Kong Arts, and Beijing Modern, just to name a few. An active conductor, Scott has also held posts with multiple music ensembles through which he has championed new works by young and emerging
I'm just going to
composers.
sit there if that's okay.
And in his talk today, he will address how Quaker themes of silence, stillness, peace, and the collective search for wisdom have influenced two critically acclaimed recent projects, The Outer Edge of Youth from 2020 and The End of Rain 2022. Please join me in welcoming Scott Ordway to be with us again today.
Well, thanks everyone for coming this morning. And thank you again for your introduction. It's quite a luxury to begin a talk with a minute of silence. I do talks about my work with some regularity in a variety of contexts. And while it's one of my absolute favorite parts of my career, having the opportunity to speak about my work in public rather than academic contexts, I still always feel a little bit nervous before doing it. And it's really nice to just have a minute to kind of settle into that and kind of center before doing this. So I may indulge in that luxury the next time I'm on stage somewhere, to the bafflement of the audience. So what I'd like to talk about today are ways in which Quaker beliefs, values, and practices influenced two large-scale works which are not on the surface sacred works, but which are, in my own conception of them, entirely emerging from my practice as a Quaker and entirely emerging from the way I've come to see the world through the habit of sitting in silent worship with you all for the better part of the last 10 years. There's no conceivable way I would be the artist that I am today, or make the kind of work that I do, without both the value system and the sort of passionate embrace of simplicity and integrity and honesty, which, oddly enough, they're not values which are prized in most professional art circles, certainly not simplicity, but also the idea that what the artist's role is to do his or her best to tell the truth.
Look at this.
The idea that the artist has access to some sort of special truth, or that the artist is uniquely privileged to tell some kind of truth, is a very old-fashioned way of thinking about art. It's a very 19th century conception, which, for very understandable reasons, is not the way most artists think about themselves or their role in society in the 21st century. But on some level, deep in my calling as an artist, I do feel some kernel of truth in that, some sense of the idea that what you do when you sit down in the silence of your studio and you spend your time trying to go beyond the limit of your experience and create something which didn't exist before, that what you're doing is looking for some kind of truth. And for me, at least, that fundamental act is very closely connected with the idea of behaving with integrity. And that for me to put notes on the page or to share an image which is not, for me, the most powerful or the most direct or the most beautiful or the most concentrated expression of an idea, is to forfeit the idea of integrity in that context. And being a part of a Quaker meeting and being a part of an organized system of belief that puts integrity as one of the pillars of its system of thought has been incredibly buttressing for me as I strive to cultivate a distinctive and personal way of speaking through sound. And in a professional arts context where you're constantly in a field of people influencing you and criticizing you, and when you're constantly comparing yourself to others, and when you're constantly measuring your aesthetic output through the lens of what's professionally viable, what can help earn a living, so on and so forth, having this something bigger to appeal to that in some way removes the choice from me has been incredibly strengthening. To be able to say, well, I don't know if these are the notes that are going to appeal to this audience or that critic or this prize jury, but because I have committed to living in a particular way through the lens of Quakerism, I have no choice but that to do what to me feels the most honest, and the consequences are beyond my control. So these are a few words about how Quakerism and particularly this testimony of integrity have been particularly meaningful to me as an artist. The two works that I'm going to talk about today, the first is an opera called The Outer Edge of Youth, and the second is a symphonic work called The End of Rain. These are both influenced by Quaker ideas in different ways. And I'll talk about each in turn. So I'm going to begin with The Outer Edge of Youth. This is a choral opera, so essentially a dramatic work for a professional choral ensemble, for a vocal ensemble. And for those of you that are classical music lovers, you're familiar with opera, which is a dramatic work on stage with sets and costumes and lighting and so on and so forth. You might also be familiar with the genre of the oratorio, which is a genre where you have, it's a concert hall performance, uncostumed, unstaged, but where you have characters who are singing in the first person. In the oratorio tradition, those characters are typically very stationary, and they address themselves directly to the audience. So in the choral opera, as I've imagined it, there are characters who speak directly to one another and play out a kind of action in front of a chorus who provides commentary and backdrop, but it's fundamentally an unstaged. So it sits somewhere between opera and oratorio in terms of the relationship. The piece is an exploration of what it means to be a boy or a young man in contemporary society, and specifically to be a boy or a young man who is uncommonly peaceable, who is uncommonly, basically just a way of, it's an opera about being a different kind of boy. It's not a work that's expressly concerned with gender or sexuality. Well, I suppose it is concerned with gender. It's not concerned with sexuality. The aspect of the two young boys who are protagonists, which sets them apart from the world, is not explicitly that they're either queer or not queer. I mean, that's certainly that's one reading of the opera, but it's not the only reading. Instead, it's an opera about two young boys who are just different. They're different because they are drawn to beauty rather than competition. They're drawn to thought and contemplation rather than action or deed. And their greatest love is landscape and the natural world. The two protagonists of this opera are between 10 and 12 years old. They're at the moment when they first begin to see a wider world beyond the sphere of the family and the home, and they first begin to ask big questions about the world they inhabit. The opera is structured in 5 acts, each of which is concerned with a different question that they ask. For me, as a person who began life in a secular way and is in most respects still a non-believer, one of the great questions of my life is, what does it mean to seek the divine? What does it mean to think about the place where a true believer, the space in the soul that would be occupied by God, or that would be occupied by sincere belief in someone who was a true and sincere believer. And for me personally, my spiritual journey, if you'll allow me to use a cliched expression, is looking for the possibility of God everywhere. I can't say that I've definitively found it, but I also can't say that I haven't. The idea that I've heard from the Quakers that the divine is distributed in all of us in some small measure, to me seems a very compelling possibility, one that I'm quite open to the idea that that's true. But it's also at times seemed to me that God is possibly in the trees. And it's also at other times seemed to me as likely as not that God speaks to us through the birds. I'm sure in other times in my life, other possibilities will occur to me, and I will consider them. I think the part of me that was raised as an atheist or as an agnostic will never truly let go of that part of me that can't come to a conclusion. I mean, that undefined, like, well, how do you really know? So to bring this back to this opera about these two young boys, they were raised, as I was, at the edge of a coastal redwood forest. It's set in an imagined California. And one day as they approach the woods, they find that they can understand the words of the birds in the trees. And beckoned by the small voices from the wilderness, these two boys who, in their friendship with one another and in their separation and in their isolation from the wider world of boys and men, accept the invitation of the birds to enter the forest and engage with them in a dialogue about the questions which are the most urgent to them at that specific moment in their life, when they first begin to see that the world is wide and the world is complex and the world is bigger than they could possibly understand. So I'll play you now about a minute from the prologue of the opera. This prologue sets the scene of the opera and proposes the idea that possibly the birds are singing or speaking with some kind of wisdom that transcends the basic beauty of their song, but actually might be something more. The text of the prologue.
Now, you've written the text as well as the music, is that correct?
That's correct. Before women and men and beautiful children walked upon the surface of the earth, the birds all sang from high above. They did not search for answers. They did not need forgiveness. They sang clearly and with the endless breath of God. And they made their home in the forest. Their children slumbered in the warmth of their small shells. The world was without form, only soft, flickering light, shadows cast by leaves of permanent trees. The only sound in their floating world was the soft beating of tiny hearts. No beginning and no end. Only heartbeats, rocking branches, and light.
Children
So the way the piece proceeds, and I'll shift now a little bit more to the sort of the structure of the piece. The way the piece proceeds is through an alternation of introductory scene setting moments where a pair of narrators describe what's happening in the imagined action, followed by responses and dialogues between the two boys and the choir of birds. So the subsequent 5 scenes of the piece follow this format. The whole work is about an hour and a half long, so we can't do the whole thing, obviously. But just to give a sense of those kind of different types of musical texture, I'll play the introduction to the first act, where 2 narrators, sung here by 2 tenor soloists, introduce the audience to these 2 boys and hit on some of the themes that I mentioned earlier. The text here: 2 boys, both serene, both innocent. Theirs was a singular friendship, all made of silence and stillness. They did not crave attention. Neither had the gift of strength, neither had the gift of action, neither had a taste for violence. These are the ones who listen. Someday, both would have become men of grace. You will meet them in the twilight of their boyhood, before they open their eyes and see the beauty of all things, before they know love, before they know the passage of time. They are children. They take their world for granted, but they long to understand. And they love the forest. Oh, how they love the forest. The cool stillness, the shadow, the soft light, the moss and the lichen, the strange flowers, and the secret silent creatures. On this day, a strange day, they approach the forest edge. They hear tiny voices laughing, singing, playing. The birds, the birds, the birds.
Was a singular friendship, all made of silence and stillness. They did not crave attention, neither had the gift of strength, neither had the gift of action, neither had a taste for violence. These are the ones who listen. Become men of grace. You will meet them in the twilight of their boyhood, before they open their eyes and see the beauty of all things. Before they know love, before they know the passage of time, shadow, for soft the moss and the lichen, the strange flowers, and the secret silent creatures. On this day, a strange day, they approach the forest edge. They hear tiny voices laughing, singing, playing. The birds, the birds, the birds.
So the first scene is concerned with the boys sort of getting over their bewilderment that they're hearing what they're hearing. And in the second scene, they start to really get into a dialogue with the birds. The incident that launches the second scene is they happen upon a fox's wedding in the forest, which is an image that I borrowed from a Kurosawa film called Dreams. If anybody remembers Kurosawa's last film, it was one of the only ones he shot in color. In the 90s. Sort of strange to think that he worked all the way into the 90s. But so this image of foxes getting married in the forest is an image that appears in the folklore of many cultures across the globe, strangely. And in many folkloric cultures, it happens during a sun shower. So this image of rain falling from a blue sky as being the moment when foxes choose to host their wedding ceremonies is an image that very bizarrely pops up in Japanese folklore, in Middle Eastern folklore, in other contexts. So there's something about this that either spread in a very deep and early moment in human history or is a coincidence. So the boys happen across such a ceremony during a sun shower, and it causes them to ask the birds, why are these two foxes? The other foxes in the forest seem to be quite solitary creatures. What is it about these two that binds them together? And it brings to mind for the boys the question, what is the nature of love between people? Where does it come from? What brings it on? And the birds offer two competing hypotheses for the boys to evaluate and consider. The first hypothesis that the birds offer is that love is a feeling which emerges as a result of the process of spending time with another person, that through the act of sacrifice and through the act of carrying out one's duty and obligation to another person, that this feeling of bondedness and devotion and love emerges from action. So that love is the result of behavior. And the boys consider this and they say that's interesting, but it doesn't seem like that could quite be it. There must be more to it than that. Instead, love is a kind of divine spark which has no explanation, which can't be subdivided, which can't be explained, but which is simply a seed that grows inside of a person inexplicably and uncontrollably, and that this seed of this seed of divine inspiration is the root of human love as well as divine connection.
Some would say
and the boys leave this interaction unsure, but with the wheels turning, that this is a question that they'll continue with. In the third scene of the opera, one of the boys finds himself alone and separated from the other boy who's wandered off in another direction, and finds himself in an unlikely place. In the middle of this dense evergreen coastal redwood forest, he finds himself in an apple orchard. And of course, finding an apple orchard in the middle of evergreen forest is evidence of cultivation. It's evidence of human activity at some prior point. And is a simple metaphor for home, the act of clearing out a space in the wild that can be sort of understood and known. And in this apple orchard, where the ground is littered with apple blossoms that have fallen in the spring, the sun shower of the previous scene transforms itself into an extremely unlikely snow flurry. And as the wind whirls around the boy and the snow falls from an unlikely sky in the coastal redwood forest, the white petals sort of blow up from the ground, and the snow and the flowers meet one another at the horizon in this kind of union of white bits floating through the air. And Sebastian, the first boy, is just overwhelmed with his aesthetic response to this moment. The sheer and simple beauty of this unlikely confluence of factors in the world around him is more than he can bear. And he desperately wants to thank someone for what he is experiencing. But Sebastian, like me, spoiler alert, this is a highly autobiographical work, as more than one critic has complained. Sebastian is not a believer in God. He has no one to whom he can direct his gratitude. He can thank the flowers for their fragrance, and he can thank the owl for his wisdom, and he can thank his family for their caring and tender embrace. He can thank his friend for his friendship, but who can he thank for everything? Who can he thank for the totality of creation? And absent that belief in God, there is no single figure to whom he can address himself. And so he feels the absence of belief in this moment, as I do. He feels that there's a phenomenon of such beauty that the only appropriate action would be to give thanks to God, and that the only commensurate receiver of his thanks would be the creator of all things. But he has no such belief. And so he feels in an intense and painful way that absence. He feels the space wherein another time God would have resided. And in a sort of outpouring of ecstasy and yearning, sings of this hollowness. It doesn't result in him believing in God. This isn't a road to Damascus moment for Sebastian. It's just a moment where he understands like the role that this plays in life. Sebastian says, flowers, flowers, flowers rising, still but moving, soaring up to meet the falling snow. Only in dreams do these fragments come together, all suspended, all in balance, soft at first, but soon becoming overwhelming, all too much to hold inside and all too strong and all too perfect. How can snow fall in the sunshine of the springtime near the ocean, in the coastal forest region where the winter never comes, where the cold is never felt? It's strange. I don't need these flowers. I can't eat or drink them. They will not help me. They cannot hear me or understand me. But I cannot contain this feeling welling up inside me, making breathing such a struggle. All this beauty all around me, all above me, softly shining, all beside me, never ceasing, without boundary, never leaving, this endless longing overflows. How can I express my gratitude for all of this, for all the beauty in the world? I want to say thank you for all of this, but who would hear these words? I can thank the flowers for their fragrance, and the water for its cool stillness, and the owl for her wisdom, and the foxes for their slow procession. But all of this? Who can I thank for all of this? I can see our friend the bird, who has been given many things: vibrant clothing, warmth and safety, a singing voice and blessed song, the gift of flight and endless freedom high above her earthen kingdom. And in return, her needs are set in perfect balance with the forest. She takes nothing but what's needed, never grasping for the excess. She is not in debt for all that she's been given. But I am overwhelmed with gratitude for all that I have seen today. How can I repay this debt? To whom can I address myself? I want to say thank you for all of this, but who would hear these words? And at this point in the drama, the birds begin to have the sense that they may have unleashed something that has gotten a little bit out of their control. They start to question whether the kind of what for them has been a game with the boys has actually become something more serious than that. And what follows then are a series of questions in the form of a litany from the birds, where they question their all-knowingness, where they question the perfection of their wisdom, where they question whether they have the right to interact in the way that they have been with the boys, whether it's their place to reveal their wisdom to these subjects. So a little bit now from Sebastian's Longing.
Snowfall in the sunshine of the springtime, near the ocean, in the coastal forest region, where the winter never comes, where strange. I do not need these flowers. I cannot eat or drink them. They will not help me. They cannot hear me or understand me. But I cannot contain this feeling welling up inside me, making breathing such a struggle. Oh, this beauty around boundary, never leaving this endless longing overflows. How can I express my gratitude for all of this, for all the beauty in the world? I want to say thank you for I can thank the flowers for their fragrance, and the water for its cool stillness, and the owl for her wisdom, and the foxes for their slow procession. But all of this, who can I thank for all of this?
In the second half of the drama, the tone changes a little bit, and the boys are confronted with what for them is their first really adult moment in life. And as they move deeper into the forest, the two of them come across a bear whose leg is caught in a trap. And next to the mother bear are two cubs who are not caught in the trap and don't really understand what's going on, or don't understand the nature of the suffering that their mother is experiencing, nor do they understand that she is slowly passing from the world. And the two boys come across this this scene and respond to it very differently. And the differences in their response reflects the differences in their disposition and the differences in their attitude and relationship to the external world and to the world around them. And these differences in them ultimately lead to two very different outcomes at the end of the opera. Sebastian, who you've just heard here, is the more extroverted, the more outgoing, the more comfortable in his skin of the two of them, and his impulse is toward action. He begs the birds to allow him to intervene in this scene, and the birds explain to him that this would somehow violate the compact of what's happening, that in this scene, they're only there to act as witness. They're not able to intervene in this kind of dream world that they're moving through. And Sebastian struggles and thrashes against this, but his instinct remains toward action and toward intervention. The other boy, who's called Nicholas, is by contrast more introverted, he feels the world more keenly. He experiences emotion more urgently and with a greater sense of intensity. And for him, the experience of compassion is simply overwhelming. The intensity with which he identifies with both the dying mother and the soon-to-be orphaned cubs is, for him, crippling. And it is a kind of compassion that he cannot move beyond. And in this moment, both of the boys are forced to do what all of us are forced to do as we move from the world of childhood into the world of adulthood, which is to recognize that there is suffering in the world which is beyond our control, and that we have to somehow inure ourselves to if we're to function on a daily basis. And ultimately, Sebastian is able to do this. He's able to understand that this suffering exists in the world, and that he has to be able to sit with that and acknowledge it and still continue to be a person. Nicholas, on the other hand, can't do that. He's unable to acknowledge that contradiction, that tension, and essentially comes to the conclusion that he can't go on being as he has been, that he can't and will never find a home in the world, that he will never be at peace in a world that has that suffering at its core. And the birds do their best to sort of shake him out of this, to explain to him that this is all some kind of dream that he can wake up from if he chooses. And he begs them instead that he doesn't want to wake up, that he doesn't want to go on in the world of men, the world of humans, the world of civilization. And he instead begs the birds to make him one of them. He begs to be transfigured. And the deal that he strikes with the birds is that he wishes to be free of the human capacity to feel pain, but also the human capacity to feel joy. He yearns for the indifference of the forest. He yearns to be a bird who, as the prologue sort of presaged, doesn't need to be forgiven because the bird is not a moral actor. The bird doesn't exist in the spectrum of emotion and right and wrong, debt and repayment. The bird exists outside of the economy of human feeling and human emotion. And for Nicholas, this is an exchange which to him seems necessary. The birds make sure that he understands what he's asking for, and they grant his wish. And in a moment, a sort of classic operatic moment of thing A turning into thing B at the high point of the opera, Nicholas, as the birds chant, "Arise, arise, arise," Nicholas spreads his wings and ascends to join them in the canopy of the trees. This happens when Sebastian has been, Sebastian has been sleeping, dreaming, wandered off, and in the final act of the final scene of the opera, Sebastian awakens from his reverie. He has passed through the forest. He's on the far side of the forest, which, in the imagined Californian setting, he's overlooking the sea, because in the forest of my mind, or the forests of Northern California, the redwood forest goes right to the coast. So he's moved through the forest, finds himself awake to the bright, shining light of day. He realizes at first that he can no longer understand the birds. He can hear them singing, he can feel their presence, and he can feel their support. He can feel their wisdom flowing through him, but he cannot understand their words. And second, he realizes that Nicholas is gone. His friend with whom he entered the forest is no longer with him, and he immediately intuits what must have happened. He knew his friend better than anyone, and he knew that this was a boy who was incapable of being a part of the world, and was someone who was destined in a way to transcend the world and to sing from high above, whose existence was on a higher plane. He perceived somehow something of some kind of holiness in his friend, and knew that he was destined to be a being apart from the world. And in the apotheosis of the opera, Nicholas both mourns the loss of his friend, but also celebrates his deep instinctive knowledge that his friend has found the place where he belongs. He's found the place where he can be at peace, and he's found the place where he can sing endlessly and possibly with the breath of God. So I will play now the end of the opera. The text says, "This sunshine, this water, where have I wandered? My brother, my friend, where are you now? I must have wandered off. Have I lost you? And where are the birds? I can't understand you. I can't understand your words. Why have you fallen silent? Where are you now? Am I all alone? Are you gone, my friend? Did you stay in the forest, lost among the trees? Do you long for shelter, hiding from the world we know? Were you abandoned? Are you frightened or alone? No. You must have found the place where you belong, hidden in the warmest burrow, all covered in tender moss, or up among the swaying branches, with your head raised up toward the sun. I can hear you softly singing, rising echoes of your calm and perfect song, words you learned inside the forest, from the river, from the lichen, from the flowers, from the birds. All around me, all above me, I can hear your endless song. You are home among the woodland, lost, away, and always dreaming, as once and now forever, like the birds inside their shells, free from torment, softly sighing, eyes cast upward, lost in sound. So sing, my friend, in your time outside of time. Be calm, my friend. Find yourself at home in your forest dreaming world beyond the world. You are not alone in sacred sleep. Oh, promise me that you are home. Promise me that you are not alone. Tell me now that you have found a home. Be calm now, for you are home." started out intending to write an opera about the ways in which boys and young men can relate to each other that is different than the way that they're typically portrayed in our culture. There are only a few different ways that you see boys and young men represented in contemporary American culture. And I wanted, rather than writing an opera that showed all of the ways that I wish they weren't, or that somehow made some evil character out of some guy who's a bully, or something really on the nose like that, I instead wanted to just imagine a different world of two young men who were thoughtful and articulate, who loved each other deeply, who were in love with the forest, who are in love with beauty, who are in love with ideas, who are curious and questioning. And in the process of writing this, it ended up becoming a project about the relationship also between nature and the divine, the inner life and the outer life, and fundamentally the idea of compassion and the possibilities and the limits of compassion as a way of living. It's an opera that was really personal to me, and so I'm grateful for the opportunity to share in this context. I haven't, and nor would I, speak about the work in exactly this way in most professional contexts or even in public. So having the opportunity to connect it really deeply to my experience as a Quaker is something I value. If you're curious to hear the piece, it's recorded, so you can find it on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you stream your pieces. This work was commissioned, premiered, and recorded by a vocal ensemble called The 13 in Washington, D.C. They're one of America's truly great professional chamber ensembles. It's an all-star group that they fly in from all around the country, who gathers in D.C. about 4 times a year to do projects. So shall we end with a minute or so of silence? Thank you.